Her father had passed before she even understood what it meant to have one. Her mother tried to build a life with another man, but when that mother died, a stepfather showed his true self. He drank too much. He lashed out with fists and words. And in the end, he bartered her away like she was nothing more than a mule or a sack of grain. By the summer of 1887, Clara McKenna was only 23 years old, but she carried the weight of several lifetimes' worth of sorrow. She had been pushed from one set of hands to another, until she no longer believed she belonged anywhere at all. Now she lay half alive in a forgotten burial ground, whispering into the dust that she was not clean anymore. If you had ridden past that place and spotted her lying there among the graves, would you have turned your horse away and left her to the silence? Or would you have dismounted and knelt beside her? The Llano Verde was never kind to men, and it was even harsher on women. A land so wide and empty that it made a man feel smaller with every mile he rode, no matter how many years he'd spent in the saddle. Out here, the sun baked the life out of grass and skin alike. The wind carried dust into your lungs, and even the dead seemed forgotten. That was where Samuel Hayes found himself on that late summer day, 47 years old, heading toward the shallow mound where his wife had been laid to rest during the fever epidemic years earlier. He had promised himself it would be just another quiet visit, one more moment with the past. But the frontier did not care about promises. He dismounted, hat in hand, and the silence of the place pressed down heavy. The graves stretched across the ground like scars carved into the earth. Each one whispered the same truth, that no one was safe from loss. Samuel knew that all too well. He was looking for anything except the small comfort of standing near the woman he had loved and lost. But the land had other intentions. At first, he thought the shape in the dirt was just a bundle of rags. Folks abandoned things anywhere out here, trusting the wind and coyotes to carry them off. But then the bundle stirred. A faint sound escaped from it, sharp enough to freeze him in his tracks. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle at his side, but what he saw next knocked the air from his chest. It was a young woman, her face pale against the dust, her body bruised and torn. She clung to a strip of cloth like it was the last piece of her world. When her lips moved, the words came out faint, but Samuel heard them all the same. "I'm not clean anymore." Those words weren't about dirt or blood. They were about something deeper, something broken inside her spirit. Samuel felt the weight of it hit him hard, because he too had lived with an emptiness that stripped a person down to nothing. Losing his wife had hollowed him out. Now here was this woman, left for dead among the forgotten, already believing she held no worth at all. He could have turned away. No one would ever know. No one would have blamed him. But the burial ground seemed to lean in around him, the rows of graves waiting to see what choice he would make. Samuel Hayes had come to honor his wife's memory, and instead he found a stranger abandoned to the same silence. He knew, right then, that what he decided in that moment would change everything. Samuel knelt down beside the girl, unsure what to do next. She was trembling like a calf caught in a storm, but there was a spark in her eyes that refused to go out. He poured water from his canteen and held it carefully to her lips. She drank slow, each swallow painful. But life stirred in her again. After a long silence, her voice cracked out, fragile as dry wood breaking. She told him about her past. Her real father had died when she was too young to remember his face. Her mother had remarried, hoping for stability, but the man she chose was poison in human form. When her mother passed, that stepfather revealed his true nature. He struck Clara, he cursed her, and when he had no more use for her, he sold her away like property. She had managed to run, but running across the frontier rarely meant freedom. 2 men caught her. They beat her, used her, and finally abandoned her in cloth among the graves, leaving her to finish dying alone. Samuel felt her words sink deep. He knew cruelty. He had seen it in men who let greed guide their hands. But hearing it here, in this place of silence, set his blood boiling. Then came the sound boots, crunching dirt. Samuel turned his head. A man stepped into the burial ground, smirk twisting across his face, his eyes locked on Clara like she was still his. "Well now," the man drawled, "what have we got here? Thought I left you for the coyotes." Samuel rose to his feet, every muscle tense. He did T-waist work. His hand slid to his rifle and the air thickened. The outlaw reached for his own weapon, but he was slower. The crack of Samuel S. Winchester ripped through the silence, echoing across the wide land. The man stumbled, clutching his shoulder where the bullet tore through. He spat, cursed, and with wild eyes staggered back toward the mesquite brush. "This ain't over, old man. You hear me? This ain't over." Then he vanished into the dust, leaving a trail of blood behind. Samuel lowered his rifle, chest rising heavy. Clara stared at him, not with gratitude but disbelief. No one had ever stood up for her before. Now, a stranger had risked his life for her in a graveyard full of ghosts. But Samuel knew the shot was not the end of it. Wounded predators always came back meaner. That man would return, and he would not return alone. The question pressed down, would Samuel take her back to his ranch, knowing it could bring danger straight to his door, or would he leave her fate to the wild? He looked at the graves around them, then down at Clara. He lifted her gently, felt how light she was, and carried her to his horse. She did resist. She clutched the strip of cloth tighter. He pulled off his coat, wrapped it around her shoulder. It was far too big, but warm, and it smelled of leather and smoke. For the first time in a long while, she rested against someone without pushing them away. The ride back was slow. Samuel's eyes scanned the horizon, waiting for the wounded outlaw to return. But the land stayed quiet. By the time they reached his homestead, the sky was painted red with the sinking sun. He carried her inside. His ranch house was plain, built of rough timber, but it was shelter. He laid her down in the room that had once belonged to his wife. For a long moment, he stood in the doorway, torn by old memories. But then he reminded himself this girl had nowhere else to go. He set a pot on the stove, boiled water, and cleaned her wounds with steady, calloused hands. She winced, but did cry. Samuel respected that. Over the next day, he gave her small bowls of broth, coaxed her to drink, and let her rest. Each time she woke, she saw his coat draped across her, and clutched it tighter. For Samuel, those quiet hours stirred something he thought he had buried. Not romance, not yet, but a reason to care about someone again. And I'll tell you, folks, moments of fragile peace in frontier stories always come before the storm. For a few days, the ranch seemed different. Clara rested. Samuel kept watch. The silence almost convinced him the trouble had passed. But out here, peace never lasted. Late one afternoon, Samuel noticed the signs. Chickens restless, the dog unsettled, and then the faint rhythm of hooves. He set down the water bucket, moved to the porch where his Winchester leaned. Clara, inside wearing his coat, watched with wide eyes. She sensed it too. Two riders came hard across the field, dust boiling behind them. Samuel's jaw tightened. He recognized the outlaw he'd shot, arm in a sling. The other man was larger, meaner, rifle laid across his saddle. They weren't riding for talk. Samuel stepped inside, told Clara in a low voice to stay back. She nodded, but clutched the coat tighter. The riders shouted as they pulled up near the corral. "Hayes, you got something that belongs to us. Send her out. Maybe we let you see tomorrow." Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, hat low. "The only thing you'll take from here is lead." The stillness shattered. Gunfire ripped through the air. Bullets chewed into the porch posts. Glass shattered inside. Samuel dropped to one knee, firing back. His first shot crippled the smaller outlaw's horse, sending it screaming to the dirt. The man rolled free, cursing, firing wild. Samuel's next shot tore into his thigh, spinning him down. The bigger outlaw dismounted, yelling, and fired. One round struck Samuel in the shoulder, slamming him back. Blood spread through his shirt. Inside, Clara heard every shot. Her heart thundered. She grabbed the revolver Samuel had left on the table. She had never pulled a trigger before, but rage burned hotter than fear. She pushed the door open just enough, raised the pistol with shaking hands, and fired. The larger outlaw collapsed hard into the dust. Silence hung heavier than the fight itself. Smoke drifted. The wounded outlaw stared wide-eyed at Clara, his grin gone. He stumbled to his feet, clutching his bleeding leg, and fled toward the horizon. Samuel leaned against the railing, pain burning his shoulder, eyes fixed on Clara. She stood frozen, gun in hand, breathing ragged, his coat whipped in the wind. In that moment, she no longer looked like the broken girl from the graves. She looked like someone who had taken back her life. "It's over for now," Samuel whispered through clenched teeth. But out here, nothing stayed quiet forever. The yard was quiet again, except for the ringing in Samuel's ears and Clara's ragged breath. Smoke drifted low, curling in the hot summer air before the wind carried it away. One man lay dead in the dust. The other had vanished, leaving behind only his threat and a trail of blood. Clara stood in the doorway, Samuel's coat wrapped tight around her, pistol trembling in her grip. She was the same girl Samuel had found near the graves. Something inside her had shifted. Samuel lowered himself onto the porch steps, pressing his hand to the wound in his shoulder. The pain was sharp, but not enough to break him. Clara dropped the revolver, hurried to his side, hands shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. "I am sorry," she whispered, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. "All I ever bring is trouble." Samuel met her eyes, steady even through the pain. "That's not true. Trouble isn't who you are. Surviving is." She looked at him a long moment, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe someone might be telling her the truth. In the days that followed, the ranch became a place of healing. Samuel stitched his shoulder as best he could, and Clara tended to him in return. She fed the animals, swept the porch, boiled water for his wound. She sat with him in the evenings, when the prairie stretched quiet under the stars. Slowly, she began to speak, not only of the cruelty she had endured, but of the things she still longed for. She confessed she had thought her life ended at 23, but Samuel's kindness had reminded her that life could begin again, even after everything. One evening, as the cicadas sang in the mesquite, Clara finally spoke the truth she had been hiding. Tears filled her eyes as she told Samuel she was carrying a child. Not his. A shadow left behind by the men who had hurt her. She braced herself for rejection, for the disgust or silence she had known too many times before. But Samuel only reached out, placed his rough hand over hers, and said, "Then it will be ours now." Those words landed heavier than any bullet, softer than any prayer. Samuel was just offering her a roof or protection. He was offering her dignity, belonging, family, and Clara, who once whispered she was not clean anymore, began to believe she was worth more than the wounds carved into her life. Life on the frontier was never easy. There would always be dust, danger, and men who thought they could own others. But there was also resilience, choice, and the strength of two people who refused to break. Weeks passed. Samuel's shoulder healed enough for him to work the land again, though pain still haunted him. Clara's strength returned, too. She took to the chores with grit he admired, hauling water, gathering eggs, tending the small garden, and each evening they would sit together on the porch as the horizon burned gold. Samuel noticed the way her eyes softened when the wind caught the wheat, or when a hawk circled overhead. For a woman who had seen nothing but cruelty, she still carried a stubborn hope that the world might hold beauty. That hope stirred something deep in him. But peace on the Llano Verde never lasted long. One morning, Samuel spotted buzzards circling in the distance. He rode out to check and found tracks cutting across the hard dirt, boot prints, wagon wheels, and the drag marks of a wounded man. The outlaw he had shot at the graveyard had not died. He had found allies, and they were circling back. Samuel returned to the ranch with his jaw set. He did not tell Clara everything, but she could read the tension in his eyes. That night she asked him, "Do you regret bringing me here?" He shook his head. "The only thing I regret is not finding you sooner." Her breath caught, and for once, she had no reply. The next day, they prepared. Samuel checked the fences, mended weak spots, and stacked extra wood near the house for cover. Clara practiced with the revolver, her hands steadier now. She was no longer the girl who had cowered among graves. She was becoming something else. And I tell you folks, stories like this remind us that the Old West wasn't just about outlaws and gunfights. It was about the choice to keep standing, even when the land itself seemed to want you gone. By the end of that week, the storm arrived. The sun had barely risen when Samuel heard the thunder of hooves. 3 riders this time, rifles strapped across their backs, pistols on their hips. Dust boiled behind them like smoke from a fire. Samuel loaded his Winchester with calm precision. Clara stood beside him, revolver in hand. Coat pulled tight, though the morning was warm. Her eyes burned with a mixture of fear and resolve. The riders drew up near the corral, sneers plastered on their faces. One of them shouted, "Hayes, hand her over, and we'll let you live long enough to bury her proper." Samuel stepped forward, voice hard. "You'll bury no one here but yourselves." The air froze for a heartbeat, then erupted in gunfire. Bullets slammed into the porch posts. Glass shattered. Clara ducked low, returning fire with hands that barely trembled anymore. Samuel dropped one man from the saddle with a clean shot to the chest. The second outlaw fired wild, catching Samuel in the leg. Pain lanced through him, but he stayed on his feet. Firing back, the third outlaw charged forward, pistol blazing. Clara stood in the doorway, raised her revolver, and pulled the trigger. Smoke belched, and the man crumpled into the dust. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the labored breaths of the living. 2 men lay dead near the corral. The third crawled away, clutching his gut, cursing with what breath he had left. Samuel leaned hard against the porch rail, blood staining his leg. Clara dropped her revolver, rushed to his side, tears streaking down her face. "You'll be all right," she whispered, pressing her hands against the wound. "You have to be." Samuel grimaced but forced a smile. "I've taken worse. Don, do you worry about me?" And for the first time in years he meant it, because he wasn't fighting just for himself anymore. He was fighting for her, for the child she carried, for the fragile chance at family they had built out of ashes. The weeks that followed were hard. Samuel's leg healed slow, leaving him with a limp. But Clara took on more work, never once complaining. She had found purpose in that small ranch, in those long evenings under the stars. And Samuel found something too, not just companionship, but a reason to live beyond memory. Clara's belly began to swell, proof of the life inside her. She carried it with quiet strength, though fear still flickered in her eyes sometime. Whenever she doubted, Samuel reminded her, "This child will never know the world you knew, not while I still draw breath." And she believed him. Through the seasons they endured. The land remained harsh. Drought stole the grass. Coyotes circled the henhouse. And always the memory of gunfire lingered in their minds, but they faced it together. One night, as the stars blazed brighter than lantern light, Samuel looked at Clara and said, "I lost everything once. I thought I was finished, but then I found you. Maybe that's how the frontier works. It breaks you down, then gives you a reason to stand again." She rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, "Then we'll stand together." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the Llano Verde, two broken souls found a way to be whole. Now let me ask you this, folks watching. If you were in Samuel's boots, would you have taken in a stranger, knowing the danger it would bring? And if you were Clara, would you have had the courage to trust again after everything had been torn from you? The Old West teaches us that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with rifles or revolvers. They were fought inside, against despair, against loneliness, against the voices that tell you not worth saving. Clara believed she wasn't clean anymore, but Samuel showed her that surviving is not shameful. It's proof of strength. And together, they carved out a life from dust and silence. And that's why we tell these stories, because out here on the high desert, on the endless plains, there are always more tales of resilience waiting to be heard. If this story touched you, if you believe the frontier still has lessons worth remembering, then do me a favor. Hit that like button so others can find it. Share it with someone who loves Western history, or who just needs a reminder that hope can be found even in the harshest places. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because we got more tales of the Wild West coming your way. Stories of love, loss, justice, redemption, and the grit it takes to keep going when the world says quit. So saddle up, stay with us, and ride into the next story. Because out here, the dust never settles for long.